Hey folks, welcome back to Macro Crazy. Okay, tonight is going to be something different, so I hope you stick around through the whole video. Instead of the usual preview, I'm going to start changing things up and start bringing in more of an educational component to these videos to try and help everybody get better at macro trading and really learn about it, why it makes sense, and the opportunities there are to make money. I hope you find it interesting. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Of course, like and subscribe. Thanks. Okay, so tonight what I'm covering is an old article. It's from like over 10 years ago, but I think the information still stands. And it's from ibtimes. And I'll put the link in the description if you want to go check it out yourself. But basically, what they're doing is highlighting the top 10 macro trades of all time. And I think for the most part, they've captured it. I'll add my comments and thoughts. All right, let's get on with the list. Starting with John Paulson. He's famous for basically making an unbelievable call and taking a position during the financial crisis, the great financial crisis, the subprime crisis, whatever you want to call it, in 2007. He's one of a handful of people in the world. And if you've seen the movie Moneyball, there were a few others, but perhaps 10, perhaps fewer, who recognized the opportunity. He took a huge position, and that was reflected in the size of his massive profit, which was $15 billion. So unimaginable risk, unimaginable balls to take that position, and the profit to reflect that. So that's why he's number one. I don't disagree with IB's ranking of John Paulson at number one, so I'm good with this. Okay, for number two, we're really going in the Wayback Machine. We're talking about Jesse Livermore, and became famous for his call of the crash of 1929. And in fact, he actually called the 1907 crash as well. And there's actually a book, I think it's called Reminiscence of a Stock Operator or something like that. You can probably get that cheap. But basically, with no hedge fund, I'm not sure what kind of leverage was available. He turned himself into a billionaire with those two calls. So pretty amazing. Not at all, he didn't have all the information we have. So not at all surprised that IB is ranking this call and really both his calls as number two. Okay, moving on to the number three is John Templeton. You might know him from mutual funds, but he also basically made some amazing macro calls. And one of his, or basically his most famous, I would say, is his call on Japan from the 1960s, where he turned bullish. So bullish, in fact, he did a very macro trader thing, which is he put his money where his mouth is and put 60% of his portfolio into Japanese assets. Obviously, that paid off very handsomely, and one of the reasons it became very famous, and then later it became famous for mutual funds. But he led the way in international investing, so amazing call in Japan. Good job, John Templeton. Okay, the next trade is basically George Soros breaking the Bank of England. This was back in 1992. He shorted the pound when they were part of the European rate mechanism. And basically, eventually the UK was forced out of the ERM, and the pound sold off, and Soros made apparently $1 billion. It's one of the most famous macro trades in trading history. And you might wonder, why is this not ranked higher, maybe even number one? Well, obviously, compared to Paulson, he only made $1 billion. Number two, this was not a unique idea. A lot of people had this idea, and they were trading it in various ways. And number three, this wasn't even his idea. This came from Stanley Druckenmiller, who worked for him at the time. What he did right was agreeing with the idea and then going in size. And that's what made him his money. So kudos for that. Nowadays, of course, he's doing far more evil things. But back then, when he was just a good trader, that was a good job. Okay, there's not much to say on the next one. Paul Tudor Jones, well-known name, profitable, good trader. Going back to 1987, Black Monday, there was a crash. I think it was around 23%. He profited from it reportedly to the tune of about $100 million, which is obviously worth a lot more nowadays. But the deal is, it wasn't a unique idea. A lot of people were out of the market or were, short to some extent. But he went in with conviction and he made a lot more money. So good for him. That is number five. The next name you may not be too familiar with, Andrew Hall from Citibank. But basically, this guy has made a few incredible calls, and this one stands out. In 2003, when oil was $30 or thereabouts, he predicted $100 oil within 5 years, and in fact, he structured his pay and Citibank contracts with counterparties in such a way, if $100 oil was hit, they would get a big payout. And just before 5 years expired, that's what happened. And him and Citibank got paid for that. And he's made some other pretty darn good calls since then. So perhaps a name, if you see in the news or elsewhere, just pay attention to that. Pretty amazing. Moving on, David Tepper, maybe a name you've heard of. He runs a hedge fund, not shockingly. And in 2008, early 2008, when there was a big fear around possible nationalization of big banks, he bought, of course, big, and companies like Bank of America, and he made a good amount of money from those buys, and basically ignoring the fears. He made, I think, his fund made $7 billion, and he made $4 billion personally. Why is this not higher? The reason is everybody knew what the issue was. The question is, are the banks going to be nationalized? And it's not clear, and his comments publicly haven't been, expansive. It's not clear whether he did very good research or he just realized this is investors' money. If I'm wrong and they get nationalized, then the investors lose their money, but I'll be fine. And if I'm right and the stocks will bounce back massively, and I'll make a fortune. So again, kind of a coin flip. So that's why it's down at number 7 and not much higher. Okay, next, Jim Chanos, famous short seller. His big call, 2001, was the collapse of Enron. He was, pounding the table, telling everybody possible that that was going to happen, and it did. And it was just simply a function of great research. So not much more to say on that, but great call. He's had other calls on the short side, so obviously he does his homework before he starts pounding the table on something. The next one is an old partner of George Soros. His name is Jim Rogers. I'm a big fan, have been for many years. In the 1990s, he was yelling all about buying commodities. Sounded crazy back then, but looking back, great call. Commodities are up hundreds of percent since he started making that call. He's also got a book. He's got several books out. One I remember, I never finished it, but I have to go back and finish it, called Investment Biker. It seems like a good book. If you're into macro trading, that might be one you might want to pick up. Okay, finally, the last one, Louis Bacon, not as common or familiar a name, but in the 90s, he made some big calls, especially early 90s. His research helped him anticipate the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq, and so he got long oil in anticipating that. And then afterwards, he reverted and got short oil, anticipating the defeat of Iraq by the U.S. and its allies, which happened. And in the first part, he got an 86% return. So solid macro geopolitical trade, although not as big as some of the other ones. So that's why he's at 10. Okay, and as a bonus, I will add one more name, Victor Niederhofer. He has a book out. It's old now, but it's called, I think, The Education of a Speculator, something like that. Interesting book, a little weird at times, but might find a nugget of information, something useful if you read it. Interesting guy, definitely out there, but has had some good ideas. Don't remember them off the top of my head, but somebody maybe worth looking into. Hope that was interesting. Let me know in the comments.